Hey, what's good, everybody? Welcome to another live session with the Hype Magazine. I'm your editor-in-chief, and I guess my name is Jerry W. You can see it on the wall. It's all right. Today, I have the distinct honor of having a spiritual leader, a global spiritual leader, and thought counselor, the physical embodiment of the Orisha. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, we're talking about the physical embodiment of Ifa, Owatala, here on earth. And his name is Oba Ifagbemi Faseye Babatunde. And one of his key pieces of work is the practical foundations of Ifa. So there's a story behind everything, and we're going to get to it. I appreciate you. And also joining him is my mentor, Dr. William Harrison. We'll address him that way at this point because he has another royal title. And I don't know how he wanted to be represented today. So we're going to give deference to Oba and his titles. And as our leader, and then Doc, you're just going to be Doc today. Is that okay?
That's okay with me.
Okay. So thank you again and welcome.
Yeah.
Let's get it, because everybody in America, everybody and they cat, uncle, and dog is talking about how spiritual they are, how in touch they are, and some of them don't even scratch the surface properly. They're talking out the side of their neck, and they're making me mad. So please, could we have you give us a introspective and from the inside looking out, talk to us about Oba. I apologize. May I call you Oba on the recording, because
Please.
their name is just way too long to
I know.
repeatedly.
This is the short version. I have maybe like 30 plus names, so
We can call him Oracle Ifa because he is the official embodiment of Ifa here on Earth for us. So I will address you however you are most comfortable. But
Obas fine.
That's okay. Okay, Oba, could you please, back to my question from the inside.
Yes.
Out. Talk to me about who is Oba.
That's a good question. I've traveled. In West Africa, I'm Oba in West African culture means king. So I'm the seated ruler in West Africa, on the Nigeria side, as well as the Ghanaian side as well. I'm installed on both sides here from my ancestry, from my father and my mother's lineage. So for Americas, I was installed as the Obarisha Obatala of America, which means that I'm the king or the leader of the Orishas for the diaspora. So I'm one of the people who's been charged with the responsibility to help and to present the Orisha, Ifa, Vodun, West African deity traditions. One of the individuals that's sharing here in the diaspora to help people come to a better understanding about what these ancestral practices are. There's a lot of people who've heard about these different things, and myself as well as a young boy. And so much of what I was learning as a boy growing up was the impetus behind me starting to make the trips back and forth to West Africa. I've made over 30 trips to date to West Africa for learning, for study, for training, with different teachers. Some of my teachers have already crossed over to the great beyond and gone to the ancestor world now. And so now my responsibility is to help to carry on their legacy, but to do so in a way which is affirming for our people here in the Western world, because our people here think differently than our brothers and sisters, in Africa do. So we're here so part of my job is to help build a bridge of understanding. And so that was also the impetus behind the book as well, was to help to find a way to present what the understanding is in one part of the world, which is where our ancestors come from, and then how it's migrated over here into the diaspora, and ways that we as African descended people can be able to engage in traditional practices or honoring some of the things that our ancestors have done in a way which affirms our life and which really meets the ecology and meets the environment of where we find ourselves here today, several hundred years later after the transatlantic slave trade.
Oh, that mess. And we're still in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we still suffer from the chains and images of psychological slavery. So it really, you know, the legal changes haven't made that much of a difference. Look, so could you please tell us, you know, like the benchmark moment in your life? You said it started young, you became aware
Yes.
young, but was there a
Mhm.
benchmark moment that led you down the path to helping people cultivate, you know, a healthy view of Ifa and, you know, the Orisha traditions? What was it that made you say, besides the divine calling, there's always
Of course.
some
Yeah.
manifestation in our face that says, oh, you got to step up. Do you remember
It's
what that
true.
was?
You know, I started making some trips, and I mentioned this in the foreword of the book in the beginning. I mentioned, you know, that when I first started making trips back and forth to West Africa, just there was a profound language difference, and you know, the language also helps to inform the view or how our people see ourselves, how we see ourselves as African people, for example, in Benin or in Togo or Nigeria, and compare or Senegal compared to how we see ourselves as African people in Trinidad, Tobago, Bahamas, and America. We all hold that concept of what Africanness means for us as descended people differently based upon where we're born. So I grew up hearing a lot of stories from my family growing up. Oh, you know, your great uncle did this. Oh, your great grandfather, he was like this, and so on and so forth. And then my family just started encouraging me and saying, you know, no one in our family has gone back home for a very long time. So as I started making the trips and made my first trip to Nigeria, I realized early on that it was necessary to really have a good understanding about who we are. Like it's important to have a good sense of self-identity. And I think for a lot of our people here in the diaspora, that's what a lot of us are looking for. We're really trying to seed our identity. And we run into a lot of things that take place where our identity is always being appropriated by different, you know, different powers that be, and so on and so forth. And so my impetus was to really present something that would give us something that gives us a sense of pride, that we can really look at ourselves and say that our Africanness of who we are is not dictated solely by proximity to the continent of Africa, but that we carry that with us wherever it is that we go. And so that was what I wanted to share as part of what I was bringing forth. And some of the things that my teachers encouraged me was saying, listen, we've taught you how we do things here back home, but the way that you understand things here is very different. Some things are maybe not going to work the same way. And even the way that we look at things, the way we may describe things, the way we may describe ourselves, the way we look at the world, the flora, the plants, the animals, you know, our environment is different here than it is in other parts of the world. And so my impetus was to say, well, we need to take a look at what do we have here, you know, that's really important, and those are things that are affirming of ourselves. Because what I started experiencing was a lot of times as our brothers and sisters were traveling back and forth to West Africa's, many times people are going looking for this sense of like, what does Africanness mean? And so many times people, myself included, in the beginning say, oh, let me take a trip back here so I can really get more in tune with what this is. But it's like, you know, you travel different places. Like my kin folks are from Kansas City. I grew up in Kansas City.
Roger
You know,
that.
Topeka and Kansas City, Kansas. KC Mo, KCK, all my
Born
kin
in
folks out there.
Topeka at Forbes Air Force Base.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Okay. It's a small world.
Yeah. It's insane.
So, you know, my family just, you know, they always encouraged me about those things, about, you know, having pride in ourselves as African people. And so I realized that it's really important to build on that as a foundation of understanding. If we're going to really try to access and go into these other traditions, it's important for us to be really comfortable and have a good sense of self. And so that was how I wanted to approach things, is rather than oh, there's something that we're lacking or something that people are missing or things that maybe we don't have. Let's build on what we already do have. And then let's talk to our brothers and sisters here on the other side of the world to see what they've got. Let's compare notes. And then let's use this as a bridging point of how we can accelerate ourselves as a people. So my first, as soon as I stepped foot, I was like, wow, I have a lot of work to do. Just the language already was very clear, and just the way that it's expressed, at least, for example, just in Nigeria, some people say there's 500 or 600 dialects of the language alone spoken. So everybody speaks it differently. Everyone communicates differently. Even their gestures and ways of describing things is very different. And so I realized that it was really important to not only understand that, but when we really understand ourselves, we should be able to see ourselves reflected in whatever it is that we do. And so as I started traveling back and forth to West Africa, I realized, oh, wow, certain behaviors that we have in this town, in KC or this place, whatever, we just like these folks over here in Edo State or this other place here in West Africa and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to really kind of highlight that and talk about those experiences of what we have as a people. What do we have in common? What are these things that are shared that we have? And then we can start bridging from there. And so that's a huge portion of what I like to share and what I like to present currently.
That's amazing. In when we're writing, we use connector words to, connect thoughts and transitions from one phase to another, and the change of timbre in the story. And so I'm seeing that applied to life. I do have two questions, and we're gonna get these elephants out the room real quick. Because we're talking about cultural appropriation, spiritual appropriation, and I have been, to events, festivals, and within the Santeria realm, and there's always a Waiupi there in the mix.
Right.
When you are addressing, and you have to be a diplomat as well, when you're addressing that in talking about our African culture and roots and how it's tied in, as a diplomat and as the representative and as the head of the church, so to speak, how do you address those who question, as Malcolm, questioned, his leader? How do you address those that question the Waiupi up in the mix in the African culture?
A good question. We don't, on the Isheshe side, let me just say like this, on the traditional side, we don't always see a lot of non-melanated brothers or sisters in this particular tradition. We see more in the Lukumi Afro-Cuban tradition. You'll see more representation of, non-melanated people or folks who are not Black, not immediately African descended folks, you could say. Sometimes people will come to me and will ask me that question. Oh, obviously, what this with this white people here, this white guy always here, this and that, what are they looking for? Why are they here in this particular thing? Ifa basically translates to meaning the wisdom of nature. So Ifa is the study of how things come into existence. And Ifa teaches us many different things in parable form about the nature of destiny and how we can really activate and how we can actualize our destiny. When people ask me questions like that, everyone has a destiny. Whether you're white, black, purple, Asian, whatever it may be, everyone has a destiny. And so when we talk about things like Ifa, there's no prohibition per se or any restriction for anybody to have knowledge of their destiny. Everyone has a right to know what their destiny is. Certain levels of participation in the tradition are certainly going to be more Afrocentric because there are certain initiations and certain things that are related directly to our DNA, to our immediate ancestry. Sometimes there are, on rare occasions, you might see some non-melanated people who may seek to be adopted as it were, into African family. You know, you see this even in times of the past. You see many times Black folks who end up with one or two stray brothers and sisters who
they at the
find their way
barbecue.
into Black. Oh, it's okay. He's one of us. Somebody's vouching for him.
Right. They just show up at the barbecue, be like, "Who is that? And where did they?"
Right. Who's this open dude here talking
Yeah.
about he's here to have barbecue and this and that, and you see him eat just like Black folks do.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, he
yeah. He complaining.
How I answer that.
He complaining about the raisins in the potato salad too. I feel it. Okay.
Right.
So I am a novice, and sometimes I don't know which questions to ask in relation to the culture that we're talking about. Because for me, and I've had to argue with people from the other side who don't understand, that are within the four walls of my domain, and not understanding, first of all, because they're living that non-melanated fantasy. I'm going to change my term while you're on, because for me, they're always going to be Waiupis, and that's just what it is. And I don't care what they've accomplished or how much of an ally they are. They're Waiupi. And it only means white. It's Swahili for white. But I don't like to say white because I don't think white is a color. White's not a race. They're European. You feel me? Okay, anyway. So I asked the question simply because, the sensitivities, and you had mentioned appropriation. You had mentioned the African DNA. And then, as in all things great that come from our part, there's always a usurper or a thief in the mix.
Absolutely.
All right. And I have zero mercy. So I just wanted to put that out there and get that cleared up so we could get on to the main topic. And
that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that question early on, because that's the question that oftentimes people will ask, is what is the policy about Ifa, Afa, Fa, or these traditions regarding participation from white folks, people who are not, immediately descended from Africa. And many times our people prefer to be in places that are safe spaces for Black folks to talk about matters that relate to us, of what's going on in our community, how we're directly affected by things that we don't always want white folks in the same room with us to have the conversation, because these things don't pertain to them. They don't understand what we're talking about. They can't even relate to that. So, how can you sit at the table of discussion when you don't even understand the topic of what's being discussed and it doesn't pertain to you?
When my 9 sisters get together, I leave the room. I have no perspective, and no place at that table in that particular discussion on women things. I must give acknowledgement to my mentor, Dr. William Harrison, who's sitting next to Obas. And Nana, I will go that far.
Okay.
Could you weigh in on what you saw and how you connected with Obas? You have multiple degrees, multiple specialities, skill sets that relate to the spiritual realm, medical realm, etc. How did the bond between you and Obas begin?
The bond was actually predestined, but the bond comes where but the world doesn't know my background in African spirituality or African traditional spirituality, where I'm a Hunagon in Budon Tron Kapita Dika Ala Fia from Dahomey or Benin, Republic of Benin, correlated through Togo and the Volta region. And when we talk about a Sheshe Lagba, really a Sheshe Lagba in the modern sense has been bastion to just Nigeria. However, when you talk about Budon, which says spirit, it's the same thing as saying Ifa, because from the Volta region, all of Ghana, all of West Africa, throughout Congo too, because there's, Palo Mambe, a derivative of Congolese Voodoo. There's Afa Afa and Ifa. That is just the divine in there. It's actually talking about the divinity right there at those levels. But when we talk about Voodoo, we have Gu or Ga and Fan, which is Ogun over here. It's correlated. We have Mame Wata, Mame Sika, Yamoja. They're all the same. Then if we take it back even further to ancient Kemet, Kush, and Nubia, we have Wajet. But if we go over to the Zambezi River, we have Nyame and Nyame, which sounds very similar to Janyame in Tree. So all these things correlative brought us together again in this life. And people that will understand saying that, to work together, because one of the edicts that Oba has, just the same as placed on my life from the royal stools and also spiritually, is to help our people understand that our Afa and Ifa, although connected, is a slight different variants because of the post-traumatic slave disorder encountered by our ancestors, where there is post-traumatic colonization disorder, to similar but totally different. And we have a multiple, as in Asheshe Lagba and others, we say there are 401 Orisha. 401, not 401 like as a numeral. 400 plus 1 is infinite. So as here, we try to bring out that we have Orisha here. General Harriet Tubman, she's an Orisha. Right. Nat Turner, he's an Orisha. Shirley Chisholm, we can count her as an Orisha. Richard Allen, we can count him as an Orisha because he was the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Anyone who has done something that has excelled at it and placed in a movement, a spiritual movement, or a movement of natural discord against a system that has systemic racism, we can count as an Orisha. That's right. And so that's how our bond and connectivity, not only recently through the university where he was bestowed his PhD in African traditional spirituality, Voodoo, and Ifa spirituality, but there is a bloodline connection as well, a natural earthly bloodline connection of relatives. Okay. So we have a camaraderie that goes beyond just, our spiritual endeavors. It's royal, but it also is actual earthly family as well. So that's how we came together.
So this is my Nana Gyata. That's mine. He's mine. And I appreciate you. Thank you so much for stepping in. I would like to know, because as with any business, religion, movement, or cultural phenomenon, people from the outside looking in have preconceived notions and prejudices with no empirical proof that the prejudice is, worthwhile or legitimate. How do you address sharing? And I've, watched you speak on several platforms. How do you best share the core principles of Ifa with, people who are curious, leaning, maybe, feeling called, but not understanding, and having been, their perception of the culture adulterated by, not only film, but religious rhetoric, and things like that. How do you begin with someone to bring them into honesty with themselves?
That's a very good question. You know, a lot of times when I work with people on the Ifa Orisha side, a lot of it is orientation and really helping people to relate some of the concepts, some of the principles, even the parables of Ifa with what they're already familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we live in a, you know, for those of us who live in America, you know, America is a Christian nation, if you want to call it that. What they say. Whether or not all the people who are saying that are following that, it's a different topic. But just please, place setting there. We live in a society that's a quote unquote Christian nation.
Roger that.
So a lot of times relate these ideas of or these teachings that people may even hear about from a biblical perspective. You know, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. I mean, many of us, especially, you know, African descended people, most of us here in the diaspora grew up in the church. And one church or another, you know, and you know, you're coming up in AME, you're coming up Methodist, you coming in, there's so many.
Angel Baptist.
That's right.
Goodwill, good music. Holiness, you know, black good music.
Sort of mystical practices. Even we come to church and we put a little extra seasoning in there. Yeah. We come to church and folks get in tongues and getting touched by the ghost and saying messages and things like that. And, you know, you didn't see that in, you know, churches that white folks were in. You didn't see them talking like that and having spirits come through them like that. But in everything that we do, we bring Africa with us in everything that it is that we touch. That Africanness comes out, even if it's unconscious and we don't know the immediate place of our birth from Africa, we just bring it. Or, you know, it's like my folks say, we bring the funk. So that's how we show up. And in everything that we do, we bring that flavor, we bring that seasoning into whatever it is that we do. So from my own perspective, even if we look at things in the Black church, to me, that's still African-based religion in my own perspective, just because I can see the correlation and say, oh, but these other things that people are we're talking about and how we worship in the church is very unique than how other cultural groups may do things. Even if you look at any type of religion, people say, oh, I'm a Muslim or whatever, but Islam practice here in America is different than it's practiced in, you know, in Iran or Iraq, or even in other parts of Africa. There's other nuances in the Philippines, Indonesia. These are all people saying they practice the same religious belief per se, but there's cultural nuances that they've taken and have inserted into the practice so that at least the essence of their core values of what their cultural perspectives were is not lost. It's infused into whatever is the current stream of spiritual practice that's taking place. So a lot of times I like to ask people, hey, where's your family from? Oh, where's your mother and family? Oh, or your mother and your father from this? Okay, what did you grow up with? What was your belief system that you grew up in? Oh, my mom was a Catholic. Oh, okay. Oh, my mother was Seventh-day Adventist. Oh, okay. And so there's so many teachings and things that's inside of Ifa for being such an old tradition. Some people say Ifa is over 15, 20,000 years old. We don't really know how far back it goes. We just know that it goes back to days of antiquity. It's very, very ancient. And even times, like Nana has said as well, in ancient Kemet or in Nubia, Kush, Egypt, depending on how a person tends to refer it. We have a lot of that. And so I like to find out where people are coming from, because if you can't take what it is that you have and relate it to the person and to where they come from, then you lose them. And so, you know, we want to share an African tradition and a Pan-African perspective, but we also have to meet our brothers and sisters where they're at right now with what's their background, what's their upbringing, what were the things that their mother and their father taught them, if there was a mother and father in the home, and if not, who was the adult, who were the people that they looked up to, because we want to try to build a bridge of understanding. And that was even the impetus behind how the book came about, was talking about how can we take this perspective about how things are done from West Africa perspective which is very unique to how we see ourselves over here. And yet it's not. You know, you go to a family gathering, you go to a picnic, and somebody say, oh, you know, that little boy is just like his great uncle Sanford, who just do like this and this and this. You have the same laugh, same chuckle, even used to eat his food the same way. Well, from an Ifa West African perspective, we might say that that person maybe was a reincarnation of that particular ancestor that came back. But we're saying that already as African people, as Black people here. We're already talking about it. It's in our language. It's just being spoken about in a different way.
He'd been here before.
Right. He'd been here before. Oh, he just like his great uncle so-and-so. Oh, he'd been here.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Now we have an understanding.
Yeah, he'd been here before. I've heard that often.
All the time.
Yeah. What you talking about? I ain't been nowhere. I was if I was a Japanese feudal lord. I wasn't from
right.
Believe that.
Or the African one. The African one.
The African one.
Yes.
Yeah. I would be Shaka's right hand man. Y'all don't know. Anyway.
Right.
We know, I know, yes.
I would have been the hood ornament on the bus. For real. Anyway. So I asked that question because people on the outside looking in, as they're exploring the religions that they've been indoctrinated with, because I don't call it taught. After having, seen, the Catholic priest bless the Panzer Division, Himmler's Panzer Division before they invaded Ethiopia. These were Christian people, supposedly. After the Tulsa massacre, these were Christian people. Supposedly, after 5 Points, after the attempt to take over Nicodemus, where we were and had established safe, prosperous zones for ourselves, the Christian people. Anyway, and while we're on history, the conquistadors used to strangle the indigenous people. If you converted to Christianity, they would strangle you. If you didn't, they would burn you. Christianity.
Right.
It's going to kill us to this day. Anyway, that's my message.
The society, wars take place or certain things take place, and the missionaries come in and they drop off food and Bibles. Oh, it's indoctrination.
And blankets, tobacco and liquor.
Right.
Everything they could. Now, okay, I'm not going to do it. I'm really on that vein today. I'm, as I watch things occur in places with Christians, pretty much backing and celebrating a genocide.
That's right.
And warriors don't do that.
No.
So how do you explain to people who are used to the iconology of the Christian churches, the blood of Christ and the different saints and things that slaves hid our original foundational aspects in order to survive and maintain some sort of connection with our beginning.
Right.
So those people, those perverted people who don't know what we're talking about, but are looking at the same things we're looking, how do you take them from curiosity to commitment and understanding? Is it usually a long process? What demons are you fighting in them to help deliver the angel of understanding?
A lot of times our people are suffering, and you mentioned this earlier with indoctrination, especially when we talk about things you were talking earlier about, Christianity and, how many of the so-called Christians have co-signed on all these enormous atrocities that have been committed against Black people, against African people here in the diaspora in America, as well as worldwide. And it still continues to this day. The fact that we even have to lobby as a people to request for our fundamental human rights is a problem. If we're saying we live in a Christian nation where everybody is equal and everyone is supposed to have equal access to things, and we're supposed love thy neighbor as thyself, love this person like your own blood, but yet we don't see that reflected in the country that we live in. The Bible doesn't say anything. It doesn't say as long as he looks like you. It doesn't say as long as he shares the same skin color as you. Oh, as long as he shares the same core values as you. It doesn't say any of that. It doesn't qualify the nature behind how you see someone else's humanity. So those are man-made constructs, but really those are constructs that come from white people. Those are things that they introduced as part of and their brainwashing of African peoples.
I'm talking about.
And so we have to get to the bottom of that. And those things have also fed self-hatred that our people have had for generations, even in terms of how we care for ourselves, how we eat, how we speak about ourselves, how we speak about our fellow brothers and sisters. Those are things that have been so ingrained into us over generations that from an Ifa perspective, a lot of times we have to have these very painful at times discussions and talk about these things of what's taken place. We have to talk about these ancestors. Oh, or great grandmother so and so had this thing happen to her a long time ago, whatever. We live in a country where, with all these atrocities that take place, what white people tell us to do every time they commit some atrocities, they tell us to forget about it. Oh, just forget about that. It was a long time ago. That was just last week. Oh, that was a long time. Oh, these Black people complaining about this particular thing and so on, the segregation. My grandmother was alive when this was still happening. We're not talking about hundreds and thousands of years ago. There's still people alive to this day where these catastrophes, these atrocities were committed to them, and they survived it. They lived to tell the tale. And so we have, a lot of what I like to start off with is just, we have to be able to have these conversations. And sometimes Black folks, we get in the room, we're talking about this and we're crying and sobbing about it. And sometimes we're very angry and speaking about these things because this is, trauma is stored in the DNA. These are things that are passed on. And even the Bible talks about it. Talk about this generational trauma, that the sins of the father passed down from the son and so on and so forth. And so these are things that are oftentimes still stored in our DNA. Sometimes our people are suffering from things that may have happened to an ancestor that didn't happen to them immediately. And people say, this person talking about this thing, you had never had this happen to you in a day in your life. Yes, but his great-grandfather did. Or his grandmother did when this particular thing was happened to them. And so now the way that they were raised was with that trauma. And now the way that they move and operate in the world is still coming from that place, because the person who raised them and gave them that foundation never had an opportunity to be able to heal from that wound. And so a lot of the Ifa, Afa, Fa tradition is steeped in ancestor veneration. We see that when you go to your great-grandparents' house and we see all these pictures of who our ancestors were. Oh, or maybe you see some newspaper clippings or somebody drew a picture of them or something like that, or some representation of who that person was. From a West African perspective, we might call that ancestor worship or ancestor veneration, but really we're just telling their stories. We're reciting those stories and saying, this is what happened to this person at this particular time. And that's the foundation of any type of practice, of West African practices, is that Ifa teaches that if you don't remember your ancestors and you don't tell their stories, you can't even engage in any types of any spiritual practices like this, because the foundation has to come from how you were raised in your home, from the values that your ancestors taught you. We have to carry all that with us into whatever spiritual practice that it is that we may be engaging in. And so those are conversations I like to have with people from the very beginning is, let's talk about what your upbringing was like. What was your childhood like? What was your relationship? What's your relationship with your mother? What's your relationship with your father? And you hear those things being spoken about very quickly in conversation with how we engage the conversation. you can oftentimes you can tell where somebody's sitting at, and you can tell sometimes you can even date where some trauma point may have occurred in their life that they themselves may not even be aware of. And so as African people, song, music, dancing, those have been established ways for generations that we've worked trauma and get these things out of our system. Sometimes you just got to go out and get on the table and dance and move your body around. But those are ways of us being able to release trauma and to be able to deal with those things. And so even in suffering and even in difficulties, there's always cause for celebration. And the celebration can just be as simple as we're celebrating the fact that we're alive, that our ancestors, whatever hardships that they may have gone through, has made it possible for us to be here in this cycle of time. Because we live in a world, especially in this country, where so many things change and take place, one after another. As soon as we're on one topic, then they want to switch us on to another topic and talk about something else. And the next thing, there's always things to
keep us off balance.
Keep us off balance, yeah. To take us away, to deflect us from talking about the real issues. And meanwhile, we form allyship with everybody else. Oh, let's come together with these brothers. They're being discriminated against. Oh, if we ally with them, they'll help us. And then by the time they get their objective met, they forget about the fact that we were their allies. And so those are things that I like to discuss with people, is saying, listen, charity has to begin at home. We have to be having these conversations and talking about these things within our own communities and with our own families. And also just this inner talk, this self-talk is a very, very important piece. So those are things that I like to try to approach the conversation with people from the very beginning. It's just dialogue, just establishing some conversation, just seeing where everybody's sitting at. As time goes by, then, there's opportunities to start to steer the conversation, but we have to build a baseline rapport with one another. We look in different places, like as time has gone by, certain places, as I was growing up, Black folks, we always greet each other. You're walking down the street, there's always some way of it, where we acknowledge one another's existence. And this day and age, the younger generation, we don't see them doing that. We don't see this so common in our culture these days. And so those are things that I like to talk to people about, is to help them to remember some of the ways that maybe their mother and their father did certain things, and to also talk about, why do you know why they did that? Because there's always some story that we have, especially in Black families, how we came to this particular conclusion, how we got to this particular point. So a lot of it is just like you were saying, it's storytelling, it's conversation.
I like to look at it and please refine my theory or my thoughts and educate me. But I'm looking at it. First of all, I wouldn't bring them in. My door is closed. My portal is closed. So I look at it, we're in a subterranean cavern with multiple niches and portals, and each portal allows something in, allows something out. When, we've come through an adulterated system, a bastardized system, the portals have become tainted. There's poison. You're walking through poison. And right. As they're trying to come to the purified fields, the rich green fields, in the world of Ifa, could I know without, you telling everybody, they cat, uncle, and dog, everything they don't need to know, some of the basic walkthroughs that you use to transition, and in the world of masonry, we call it healing.
Yes.
As you come from a 4-letter to a 3-letter lodge, the term is called healing. So you're bringing them out of the darkness into the light, so to speak, and making them more comfortable with entering, going through the purification process, which is mandatory. You have to wash that world off. You have to wash the taint off, and because you're opening a new portal, and there's a danger in the transition that if you don't allow the demon to go, the blessing can't come in. So how do you step them through it? Nana.
How do I step into that process of shedding?
Yes.
That's a good question. a lot of,
If
at
I'm
least from an
asking the
Ifa
wrong
perspective.
questions and you don't want to answer them, please, you can shut me down at any time.
Oh, no, it's a good question. I love the question.
Good question.
Because you're asking the questions that more people should be asking these types of questions. That's why I really like the question, because it's very comprehensive. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of orientation. In Ifa tradition, people may engage in spiritual baths, spiritual cleansings, purifications, fasting at different periods of time. Different traditions, have, there's different prayers, or say incantations or mantras, or you could just say affirmations, just ways of being able to change our vibratory state. And a lot of that, a lot of how I will start off with people in the beginning is just helping people oftentimes even just reframe how they speak about themselves. Because sometimes people will talk about certain things, especially Black people. We talk about certain things, and even if there's a great pain around it, but we oftentimes will use languaging that still cements and it anchors this self-harm from the initial wounding of what we may have gone through. It stays with us, and now that's how we speak about ourselves. And so a lot of what's necessary in the work that I like to share with people is helping our people to really reframe how we look at the world, how we look at the country we live in, how we look at fellow Black people in this country, as well as the world, how we reframe how we talk about ourselves, because sometimes we have a habit as Black folks. There could have been something that happened 30, 40 years ago, and we still talk about it like it just happened yesterday. But we can tell that there's still some wound there. There's still an injury there. And so it's important to help people to even go back as far back as they can remember, to perhaps where the origination point of the pain came from. The root cause, as it were. And that may even be, sometimes with some people, that might be months. Sometimes it may be longer. It depends upon the person.
Yes.
And it really depends upon how deeply embedded the trauma or the wound or the pain is.
Yes.
But a lot of it also comes down to encouraging our people to have the bravery and the courage to be able to look at these things, because when we look at what's happened in this country, many times as our people would talk about wounding and talk about things that we were experiencing, many of our great leaders in the Black community were assassinated or were killed, or we still live in a society where our leaders are still being demonized by the media and by other institutions that want us to not pay attention to what our own people are trying to share with us about what's our experience. Black folks, oftentimes we may even suffer from a problem of, we may not take a certain thing as fact unless we hear white people say it first.
Right.
Hey.
White people say, "Oh, must be a fact." Okay. Black people say, "Ah, man, he's on that conspiracy theory thing. That's not. I don't know if I can confirm that." So we have to change how we look at those things, and we have to also reframe what we're putting our trust in, our belief in.
Yeah.
And so those are starting points of how I like to engage in that. And the divination through the Ifa system helps us to find where's the entry point to begin having the conversation.
Nana.
One of the things that people, if I may jump in, I felt you. One of the things that works on a lot, and we both, and Nana Abena, work in this realm, is the language of genocide for self. A lot of times we do not realize that we're uttering negative things. Will come out of our mouths, this instrument that causes life and death, with something, and it almost has a variance of positiveness, but right away we come back with an ill point. And it's just this superficiality that we have learned through the genocide of eugenics and all these, the Holocaust, they have a Holocaust, we have a Holocaust, and these things throughout years. And so we take our time in Budon, whatever we call the name, adjacently in other cultures. We work with them first to sit down and bridge the gap of self-work.
Mm-hmm.
Then we lead them, since you were saying about a process, then we lead them from self-work. And here sometimes is the situation. Everybody, you go to Africa and that's going to make you African. No. The Ofagie, Kwame Nkrumah said, I'm not African because I was born there. I'm African because it was born within me.
That's right.
And we try to get them to understand the divinity within. Then we start, once we're working with that, we get them to understand the divinity that was within their ancestors.
Okay.
Then we can bring them to an Orisha, because our people will implode sometimes because the same ashe or the same power, the same mysticism is different for an enslaved people than a colonized people.
Correct.
And so have to work that way with our people here. Because if you ship a person over there and they start talking about old Shun, but they forgot about Mama Bessie, who was the praying grandmother, who kept Aunt Eileen away from Massa being raped. Therefore, you Aunt Eileen's child, and Aunt Bessie prayed for you, might have stabbed the Massa to keep him off of you, and that's why you're here.
That's right.
Because he didn't kill both of them. You're dishonoring the blood lineage of a madam warrior in your family. But you've gone to Oshun. But you've leaped over your ancestral lineage. And that's the one thing we have to always work on. Obas does it intentionally. I do. Nana Abena does. We make sure that that understanding is clear. Don't forget about where you come from, baby. Like a grandmother used to say. Going over looking for something over there on that side. Because what's over on that side may not, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to not have them say this. So if they want to write me, I'm time enough for them. You know me, Dr. Jerry. Sometimes we need to stay away from some of the people that sold our very lineages, asking them for speech.
Yeah.
That because sometimes you're going to end up sleeping with the enemy, and then you wonder why things aren't working out for you.
That's right.
Because they sold your great grandmother, but then you want to run over there to be blessed by an Orisha. Weigh that out. Weigh that out. Because one cometh before destruction, as the old folk used to teach us. And I digress from that, Dr. Jerry.
That was beautiful, Nana. No, I won't say it. I'm not.
Come on, Clanus, come on.
I am a segregationist.
Yes.
Bad people and good people shouldn't be together. And good people
absolutely
shouldn't open their portals to bad people. Because it takes a special power. It takes a special skill set, a blessing, and an understanding before you open your portal up to someone who has, come through the shit pond. You got to clean that stench off of them. And I don't want them in my house. I don't care. I that's a failing, a fault of mine. And I understand this. I accept it. But I'm also Shiva. And I relish in being Shiva. I destroy world. And that's so. Nana, what I was going to ask you before I really get into it. What I was going to ask you is because you are also a master and a mystic from the Oriental arts, the Asian arts, and philosophies as well. And
I can tell, but
there
go
are,
ahead.
well, I mean, there are, you know, and this is really basic, and I apologize for being so basic, but, you know, during university, we had to study the world's major religions, you know, the seven and
Yeah.
all the way through. And
Yeah.
there was always a commonality. Well, except for Jainism, they're different. But there's a commonality amongst the religions, the philosophies, the thought patterns of enlightened and elevated minds.
Yes.
As you, Nana, came through your still continuing education, but as you mastered these different levels, what commonalities did you find in the Asian mindsets and methodologies that meshed with the culture of Ifa? Because there are undeniable things across all the religions. There's a central focal point, there's a hub with all these spokes that have been adulterated by interpretation.
Right.
Okay, that's my question. I'm gonna shut up.
Okay, I got it. Okay. Wow. How do you make that short? Okay, I got it. Okay, we were talking about Christianity, because remember, Dr. Dobie, I don't know who Chris is. Everybody hates Chris, but I'll just call it Christianity. The commonality when we look at these things, when you talk about Shakti Shiva coming from Satarama Dharma, when you talk about Kali, or when you talk about Ruth, or when you talk about Lilith, I'll go somewhere that most people don't like to deal with. And when you talk about all these, there's primordial worship before misogynisms. Everybody understood that the universe, seen and unseen, is a gigantic womb. And that this concept of the cosmic egg, or the rebirth, the renewal, or as they call it, salvatore, or salvation, but dying to the physical self and understanding of the spirit within, because we are spirit experiencing a human theater. That's why Shakespeare stole the phrase from ancient Kemet: all the world's a stage. We are merely performers and portrayers, and living out the, you know, the trilogy of that, the soliloquy. And the commonality is thus: in Buddhism, they're talking about Dharma. In Taoism, they're talking about this thing. In Zoroastrianism, they're talking about this. And a lot of times what happens because of adulteration through religious makeups, people forget the way. I love the movie, or this TV series, it might be a movie too, but The Mandalorian. George Lucas took so much of Boudon and put that in The Mandalorian, where they were taking the creed and then talking about, this is the way. This is the way. Have you removed, and see, a lot of people don't catch this when they're watching certain things. They're just watching it for pure entertainment, which is fine. Everybody needs a break from the turmoil of today's, you know, menage. But there's one thing the almoner said to Mando, always: have you removed your helmet? Okay, let's compare that. Let's do a comparative. It says, put on the whole armor of God. Have you removed your helmet? Has anyone seen your face? That means that you were not shielded or protected. Then you have not forsaken the way. And then they would say, this is the way. This is the way. And the thing is that when you look at a tree from an African spirituality, there's two sets of journeys. There is a root journey and a branch journey. Below the ground is yet another tree of life. It's just growing downward, stretching out and stretching forth, and grabbing the nutrients and minerals of the soil. And then the branches up grab the nutrients of the atmosphere, the ions, and the vitamin D3 and the vitamin D that, and it's getting all this chlorophyll, and the trunk becomes wider and wider. In comparative, or the study in comparative religion or spirituality, it's the one thing becoming priests and priestesses, and we try to allow the adepts or followers or novices know that it's a journey, that is a marathon and not a sprint, because you will come to an understanding of this in enlightenment. When you can see, I'll use the common term known in English, God and everything in God, then you're on the true pathway to enlightenment. Because even the Odu, and we have Odus in Benin, we have Odu, there's Odu across Africa. We're just more common because you're Gentiles or the Europeans or the conquerors or the colonizers called everybody from the Bight of Benin Yoruban. And that's not true. You have Nok, you have Ijawa, you have this one,
that's
and
right,
that one and that one that came out of that Bight of Berlin and walked another trail of tears way before the Native American brothers did.
Correct.
And so they just lumped everybody Reuben, because everybody that came was not a Reuben. They were Bantu, they were Mandinka, they were Wolof. And so each of them had their nuances. One made divine with a rock, one made divine with a cowrie shell, one made divine with a cola nut, because the cola doesn't grow in certain places in Africa, and the cola, sure enough, doesn't grow here. Like when our people were saying hoodoo, H-U-D-U, not the corruptive H-O-O-D-O-O, when they took on different things to now cast divination, right, which are the same. We couldn't find certain herbs that were made grow in now what is called Nigeria, or now what is called Ghana, or now what is called Sierra Leone. There are certain herbs that are native here that we had to make substitution on, like you said, in the church comparatively.
Correct.
We have Santa Barbara, which is adjacent to Shango. Then we have Saint Anthony, who is adjacent to Papa Legba, Legua, or Eshu. They're all, but most people don't want to hear that, because to keep people divided spiritually, everybody says divide and conquer. The worst divisional tools are religion.
That's right.
Once you keep the power down, because every holy book talks about gathering together and summoning God down. Summoning the emissaries or Voodoo or Jinn. Jinn got transposed because of that.
That's right.
Jinn weren't bad. Sufi don't count. Sufism doesn't count Jinn as absolute bad. There's so many maleficent and there's so many good. And so, but most don't say that. But when we are divided amongst spiritual power, they can keep us outside of that. They have us financially.
That's right.
They have us educationally. They have us in every way to enslave us again. And that's why, our linkages together start to formulate. We want to see more. We're separate. We talk about Afro-Cuban traditions now. The word there is Afro.
That's right.
It's Afro-Peruvian, Afro-Colombian, African this, Afro, right, or Afri, because some people get that mixed up with the hairstyle. And they all are based and have a traditional place. There's Afro-Brujos from Espiritismo or Sanse. And most of our people don't know about this. Look at what happened years ago. You could turn on a TV program still in the early 2000s. And they were like, oh, Santeria. Then you'll see all these Haitians. Haitians don't practice Santeria. Haitians practice Haitian Voodoo. But they were acute. But that was Cubano.
Correct.
And they were misrepresenting it then.
That's right.
So all this misrepresentation not only comes from ignorant, but comes from a plot made to distort. We'll know it in the military as PSYOP.
Right.
I knew you would like that one, Dr. Jerry. And you get into the minds of the people and change them, and they're drone. They're now drones. And so when they hear Asheshe Lagba, Ifa, Afa, oh, if they hear hoodoo, and then people have corrupted it and they think it's all about evil and making ebo or sacrifice or propitiations. But when they go to the table in the Roman Catholic Church on High Mass, or the High Anglican or Episcopalian Church, or Lutheran or Methodist, they do ebo because they talk about the blood of somebody and the body of somebody. So that's how we correlate what you asked earlier to Obas and myself.
Mm-hmm.
We let them see that the words change because of the players that hold the chalice.
That's right.
And they make one thing, the transubstantiation thereof.
That's right.
When that's what an ebo is, the transubstantiation or propitiation of blood, to make sure that all things being equal can come together and operate in the mystic realm. We can't hear you.
It might have been good.
Can't hear you.
It might have been good though.
Okay.
But
I
was going to say that it brings to mind, since we're talking about the blood in the body. How can you believe that you're covered in the blood when you're covered in your blood?
Wow. That's a very dynamic way of saying that, Dr. Jebby, because that would lead, once you make that statement out, that would say, what blood was shed for you? Or what blood are you allowing to cover you?
Correct.
Because when I say those two differences here in African spirituality, see, there's a maleficent blood. And then there's let's use the churchdom word of righteousness. And people say, well, what is righteousness? It is that which does not go away, the universal laws which cannot be broken unless you pay a price. And the price be blood.
That's right.
It may not be your blood, but it's going to be somebody's that you love.
All right.
And that's when we get into the question of transubstantiation. We all transubstantiate every day. We pay a price.
That's right.
Whether we believe it or not, because there's nothing free in the universe. There is a law that governs us all. For every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction.
That's right.
So if I do something, there is a karmic effect.
Correct.
And that's what African spirituality, like in Sarkma Dharma, that's the comparative. That's why when you go into parts of Africa, you will see Shiva because she is divine mother.
That's right.
And then you be like, wait, I'm here. And that's why you can go into Temple at Luxor and see an edifice that looks like a Shiva or with a trident, or where they took and stole and took it away and gave it to a thing called Aquaman in DC Comics. And that's what all these different things are like that.
That's right.
But when we look with an eye, as we share with others, of open mystic mind, you see how all things can be revealed. And then we take them through that journey, because what's happened is they become blinded by the light, as that old rock song used to say. But that light is actually a dark light, not a luminous light.
Okay. So if I may, I'm going to ask permission, so you can ignore this question if you like. But when we talk about the cosmology of Ifa versus the Greek and the Roman zodiac, I'm just going to ask this as benignly as I can. How do you explain their disregard for nature in the creation, succor, and defense of the powers of the Orishas that are put into humankind, our representatives here on earth. They've taken them, bastardized them, pastified them, and forgotten the root. Is that a question you would address?
I like this question because I'll speak about a little bit here. So there's a lot of perspectives, certainly, that inform that how we've come to this place. A big portion of this is appropriation. It's cultural appropriation. I mean, this is known fact. The Greeks went and traveled to Kemet, or Egypt, if you want to call it that. Egypt's not even the name, that's a name that was given to them. That's not the name that they had in Africa at that time. That was a name that was assigned to them. And so when we look at this, even the history books say that the Greeks of old traveled to ancient Egypt in order to learn, that they were considered as babes to this wisdom and this knowledge. And they went to be initiated into different mystery schools and different traditions. And this is where you get, the Pythagorean theorem. These were things that were being taught in ancient Egypt thousands of years ago. This wasn't something that these Greek philosophers came out, Pythagoras came out. We've been talking about that. This isn't news. But when we talk about things like, well, why are they taking and not giving representation, is because a big portion of it also comes down to the value of human life, that the value that others assign to human life. And what we see in this world is that much of the Eurocentric perspective doesn't place value in African life, not for anything that's affirmative for all of humanity. Now, they found value in African life to enslave African people and bring them here to the diaspora for free labor. They found value in that. They found value in stealing and appropriating our religious beliefs and taking and making it their own. Even, for example, if you say, in the Bible, they say, I am the way, the truth, and the light. No one gets to the Father except through me. And so they say that Jesus the Christ, or the Messiah, the awakened one, the arisen one, who gave these teachings to his disciples. And they say he had 12 disciples. We're talking about the zodiac. You were talking about the zodiac again. So we see there's a correlative there as well. But my point in saying that is this concept of you have to go through this other intercessor to get to the creator. All African traditions teach that. If you take the word Jesus, J-E-S-U-S, if you take the J off the front, you take the S off the back, you get Eshu in the middle. From Isheshe perspective, Eshu is the person who's considered to be the one that people have to propitiate, or is the intermediary between humanity and the spirit world. And so when you see oftentimes Catholic people or other Christian people, they cross themselves before they begin their prayer. But we say Eshu is the deity that lives at the crossroad. So my one way of looking at this is, in this country and throughout the world, humanity, particularly those coming from a more Eurocentric perspective, realize that in order to control a nation and in order to control the consciousness of a people, you have to control how they perceive time. How do they see time? So now you move things to a Gregorian calendar, which is based upon the revolution around the sun. And now you get everybody to agree that this is January, this is February, this is this many days in the month, and so on. Now you can control the consciousness of of the people that you're governing, because you're controlling how they perceive and how they relate with time. And in the Ifa, in West African perspectives, we look at time very different. Most indigenous traditions are agrarian cultures. So we observe things based upon a lunar calendar. And so you see those things. How we see that here in this country? Well, Black folks were always using an almanac. to see when's the time to harvest our things, when we're going to be planting the yams, the sweet potatoes, collard greens, when's the time to be pulling these things out of the ground, and so on and so forth. And so even if you go now into modern day, and people say, well, why are these things taking place, of why we see maybe credit not being given to African people and things like that. But we know that the Eurocentric perspective does find value in things of African descent, because if you look at the enormous amount of white on black crimes and police violence and things like that, that's being wrongly perpetuated against African descended people. Nana was talking about this earlier and talking about blood, but from an African perspective, we consider that to be human sacrifice. That's blood sacrifice. You're spilling the blood of black people on these streets. And so if we say that blood has power and blood comes with covering, then that means that this country is being covered with the blood of black people, is being covered in the blood of our ancestors. That's why this country, this nation is even in the place of prominence that has risen to today and continues to maintain the power, because you don't see them sacrificing their own people. You don't see that. You see on the news every day, and whatever. You see some white guy acting irate, and the cop's holding the gun, and the cop starts running away from the guy. The guy's not even armed. Black man gets to saying something, done. Terminates him immediately. And my point is saying is, this is by design. This is part of a long-term plan of what's been happening for thousands of years. This is eugenics. We're in a battle for the very soul of our people. We're in a battle for the very soul of who we are, and our very humanity. And we've been brainwashed to believe and being told that these particular things are wrong, or to demonize certain perspectives and whatever. But meanwhile, those who are in places and seated in positions of power know how to be able to maintain that. And the way that one way you're able to do that is to demonize people against the things which is our very foundation, which are the things that we've been practicing for thousands upon thousands of years. But now they've repackaged it and they resell it. So it's just like, you hear some song or whatever is going on in the Black community, and then a few years later, then you hear it in the elevator. Now it's elevator music. They flipped the switch. They changed it to being something else. Oh. So my point in saying is that those who are in these positions, they know where the power is coming from, and they know that there is a great intrinsic value in Black people and African descended people. And they know for a fact that they can't get anything done without us, because if they could, they would have done so already. And they can't continue even to remain in the positions of power that they are without Black people. Even we talk about things even in voting and things like that. When Black people come out and we vote, things change. Things happen. We make moves. We see things taking place on a very powerful, very fundamental level. Even you look at the Black power movements and things like that, and our moves we've had for generations. Hey, listen, if we flood drugs into these communities, we get these people to kill each other and whatever else, we get them to hate one another. Hey, we can sit back here and we can shut down this entire thing here and diffuse this. So now we've become desensitized to seeing these things. Now it's a matter of sport. You see on the news, 6 o'clock in the morning, this Black man got shot because of this and this. 12 o'clock in the afternoon, another story. Then in the evening, another story. Then in the evening, another story. So we're constantly being bombarded. And this is, you could call this is spiritual warfare, but it's more than that. It's actual warfare. It's not just spiritual warfare. It's an actual warfare where we're trying to save our very lives, literally. And that only comes about with having right knowledge, right understanding, right action, right livelihood. All those things set the foundation for that. But we have to open our eyes, because many of us, we live in a society where it's like we're being encouraged to look at things with blinders, or my mother used to always say, looking at things with rose-colored glasses. We're being taught, this thing that hurts, this thing that's painful, just look the other way. Why is it in Black communities that you see more liquor stores and things like that in our Black communities than you see in other communities like that? Because these are things that are in place to put us to sleep. These are things to make us to not pay attention and not see what's really happening.
Jesus,
I like what Obas was
street, liquor store across the street.
Now,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
They have what they call total wine. where you can get a membership, newsletters, wine tasting. Try to taste some wine at Habib's store, you're going to get cut, because there's the difference in what they want to do.
Right.
In certain communities, it is a festivity, non-genocide. In another community, it's genocidal in keeping you with a spirit-filled, but in a maleficent way, not in a joyous way.
That's right.
There's a beginning for everything.
Yes.
That's right.
It begins with nature, I think.
Yeah.
Nature provides empirical proof of what is true and what is false, and the things that live under false pretenses eventually are absorbed by nature, by the jungle. You know? We taught our people, taught the other side. They didn't know where they were. They didn't know who they were. They didn't have a starting point. This mess didn't start until they went to Egypt and learned the concept of zero. They were at zero. They were at a starting point.
Yes, that's right.
And our people moved the needle forward for them.
Yes.
And a starting point, our starting point is based on nature. You know, why do birds turn their tails to the wind when they're on the ground?
Right.
So they won't get blown away. They might topple over, but I guarantee they won't be carried away on a current of air.
Right.
So starting point with nature, starting point with Christ saying, you know, your starting point is through me. I'm the portal to get you there. But he never claimed divinity. He started with his natural processes. Like, I have the process, the methodology, the philosophy, and the word to guide yourself from zero into the light. Council of Nicaea, bunch of robed people got together and said, well, we need to put a stamp on this, because now we're going to have kingdom-wide religions. What? The Church of England was Christian, right? Catholic kind of ish, Episcopalian or whatever, which is basically Catholic, but more boring.
Yes.
And then, and I'm just talking about entertainment value, church entertainment value. It ain't Mount Carmel, I promise you. Anyway,
right.
So you're from Topeka, you know Mount Carmel.
That's right.
Church line, that they know how to do it. So they started the manipulation, the mind mapping, the long con, so to speak, that has run its course. Actually, it's run its course, which is why they're so discombobulated right now. Their plan didn't work. We survived the attack. We're here. We're supposed to have been decimated as a people. Used up, destroyed, I feel. That's the message that I get. But we're still here. So anyway.
You're absolutely right.
So it's you should be talking. I shouldn't be talking. But
no, please.
We go to from interview to conversation, and then I get to share. So and I appreciate the honor of being able to do that with someone of your stature, both of you. And so y'all don't trip, because God's still working with me. Whichever name or aspect of God, the higher power that you like to pronounce, they are working on me. And it's great to have, you know, two enlightened minds, and then the father responsible for continuing and furthering, you know, the education. And I learned this new word. Can I use it? Elucidation of a people. Of a people. You know, a good starting place for me, I'm, you know, obviously the neophyte. Practical foundations of Ifa. You could argue from the Bible, one of the most violent, reprehensible tomes ever compiled by a human being under the guise of giving God's word. Or, you know, you could just take a moment and explore some real thought process, some prayer, the results of prayer that have manifested themselves on pulp in black and white. It's important to learn, you know, what's right. I think Thoreau said it the best. It's not so important that a man garner a respect for the law, but for that which is right. Anytime that something has been adulterated, anytime that a culture has been pillaged, subjugated, we have to call you back to zero.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You have to refocus, reset, recenter.
Yes.
We have to balance, we have to rebalance the equation, as it were.
Right. And we have two gentlemen sitting here, you know, one the head of our house. I say our house because I do believe. And I'm going to say second in command, not in a denigrating way, but you're not Oba. And,
right,
you know, title-wise and position-wise and appointment-wise. But you're Nana. You're still, you know, the king in your family.
Right.
This is the high priest, the Babalawo, for those of you, but he's higher than the Babalawo. I'm taking y'all somewhere y'all not ready to go. Anyway, anyway, I would like to know, and I'm respecting your time. I understand that, you know, you've got a lot going on. We've interrupted some, you know, critical items that they were doing, being blessed with this conversation and, you know, bringing the gems. I would like to know from Oba basic tenets for the novice who has entered our world, but facing attack from the outside forces, facing, you know, missiles of doubt. How do they recenter? How do they refocus? How do they recapture? Besides calling you and saying, help,
Sure.
What do you recommend?
One thing that I learned a long time ago is one of the most important keys in any type of endeavor, especially as we really seek to really be more seated into who we are as a people here in this part of the world and throughout the whole world as well. Nana made the comment and talk about, you know, we have, you know, we're dealing with, you know, with post-traumatic slave trauma here in the diaspora, and then in Africa they're dealing with, you know, the trauma of colonization that took place either from the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese, the British, you know, many different European or Caucasian groups, like white folks that came in there, different cultures that were exploiting our people at that time and still are to this day. It's just taken a new form. You know, many things have changed, but yet many things are still the same. sincerity, there's Ifa teaches in parables and what we call Odu. Odu in Ifa language just means dark matter consciousness. It just means that which we haven't seen, what hasn't been revealed, what the eyes cannot readily perceive, per se. And so there's various scriptures that you could say, just using a more biblical term, we have scriptures that we use that describe different things. And one of the scriptures in Ifa is a scripture called Oturapon Meji. And the scripture, I'm just going to give just a brief mention what the verse talks about. The scripture basically talks about how a long time ago there had been a young man who had been initiated. He had been started in the tradition by his father. His father was sharing the family tradition, sharing the values and perspectives and ways of how our ancestors have been worshiping and venerating from generation after generation. But his father had passed away prematurely before his father had a chance to complete his training and to teach him all the things of the family traditions, as you could say that way. And so now the next year comes around, and now it's the man's name is the person, the story, his name was Oyepulu. So this young man Oyepulu, now the next year comes around, it's his turn now to lead the family and to maintain the traditions that have been passed on from generation. But now it's his turn, and he arrives and comes to the location to do the rituals of upliftment for the family, and he starts crying because he's uncertain what to do. Do I pour some libation of some spirits, some alcohol on the ground first? What did my father do? What did Papa do? Do I give some water first? Or maybe I give some corn, or maybe I bring some offering of some wheat, or whatever thing they may have had on hand. And the scripture says that the spirit of his ancestors came in the form of a bird. It came to his shoulder and said, all those who engage in any type of endeavor, be it spiritual or otherwise, as long as one comes in the spirit of sincerity, all the things that we lay our hands to will have success. We'll see good benefit from it. And so one thing that I oftentimes will share with people is I just, a lot of times I say, listen, in other words, that just means don't fake the funk.
That is
whatever it is. Be real about it.
right.
Be sincere. If all you can give is 10% of yourself, then give fully that full 10%. That when you're doing this, that you're fully engaged mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all parts of your being is present and actively engaged in whatever it is that you're doing at that time. But that's the key, is that everybody knows whether or not they're being sincere and whether or not what they gave was 100%. We may say to everybody else, oh, yeah, I really did it. But you look yourself in the mirror, you don't have to call anybody out on that and say it. But we know if we're being sincere or if we're not really being sincere. And that's the key really in any type of endeavor that you're doing is that you're bringing the best part of yourself and you're giving your utmost. If you can't do whatever you can accomplish today, then tomorrow's another day to pick up the piece and say, okay, you know what? I did the best I could. Maybe I stumbled here in this particular thing. I could have done this a little bit better. It's okay. Now let me try it like this. Tomorrow, I'm going to try and do it in this particular way, or I'm going to do it differently. Or maybe I'm not even going to think about this mistake, or I'm not going to give it any more thought. I'm just going to do things in a way that you would never think about doing things at all. And so we have to approach things also from a place of, because this sincerity also comes with acceptance of our core human frailty, that we're always going to make mistakes. Nobody's going to get anything down perfectly. Mm-hmm. And really, there's no one watching us besides the spirits or the ancestors and really ourselves, because our eyes are always recording. Our eyes are recording devices. It's not just what we see, but it's recording this information and storing it in our brain for recall for a later point in time. So you can be lying to other people, but your own mind is keeping a record and is recorded, whether or not what you said and what you're telling other people, is that what you really did? Is that what we're really doing? And so we have to have this honest conversation. Not to talk about this, what you say, this is that self-dialogue. And so that's what I like to encourage people as well from an Ifa perspective. It's just taking a look at ourselves and taking an honest look at honest appraisal and seeing what areas that we have strengths in and what areas that maybe we can improve on and we can do better, and not being too hard on ourselves. There are times, and also having discipline. You know, if the discipline's coming from somebody else, that's a different perspective. But we're talking about self-discipline. A person can't be a disciple or a serious practitioner of anything that it is that they're doing if they lack any self-discipline at all. That's a very important key. And that self-discipline also feeds or informs this sincerity, because this scripture of Ifa essentially says that in all things that we do, if we call upon, or we at least remember and ask our ancestors, whether it's out loud or whether it's in our mind silently, to support us, anything that we may have omitted or we may have made a mistake, our ancestors, by the grace that they've given to us, especially those of us here in America, where our blood of our ancestors has been spilled for hundreds of years, and it's still being spilled. We need to be calling upon those ancestors to be supporting us and to be backing us and to be calling them by name. Because by doing so, they you know, we're talking about the law of thermodynamics. Energy doesn't die, it just takes a new form. So when a person dies, the body just changes shape. It moves to but that energy, that blueprint is always present. But how do we activate it? How do we call it? We call on it by calling upon the names of our ancestors and by telling their stories and by remembering them, and also by seeing ourselves reflected in who our ancestors and those who've come before are. If we can't do that, then then those are areas that we know that we need to start working on healing actively.
I talk to young parents, especially young fathers, and you know, they talk about how bothersome family life can be, you know, raising the kids and running here and running there. And I look at them, I've experienced this, and I'm finally able to raise a child. And I say, you know, those moments that you're complaining about, those are the moments that make you immortal. Because the stories are passed along, as you talked about. Oh, Uncle Rufus, he ate this way and he liked this on it. He only wanted Frank's hot sauce. And that little boy over there, just like him, he been here.
Right.
You feel me?
That's right.
Immortal. But someone needs to remember your indicators that you left behind, to recognize them when you come back.
Right.
That's right.
Immortal, immortality. Create the memories to let them tell the stories. The Vikings had it right. We're going to Valhalla, but we're going to die in glory, and they'll sing our names in glory. The glory inside of our family, inside of our community, is to say, Miss Jameson down the street would tutor the kids on the block after school.
Yes.
They were having problems with reading. You know, the young college girl who got that passed down to her from an elder would tutor the math in the block. The village concept, right? Okay. Just saying. So, but legendary equals immortal when translated into story form.
Correct.
Which creates traditions. If you're in the legal field, Mr. Trump, is called precedents. And but on the family, this is how we survive as a family. This is how you remember. This is how you come back to zero.
Right.
Correct.
So don't complain, brother. Because at 90, you know, should we make it there and be blessed there? And we're not ambulating on our own. That young person that, you know, was a bother to you because they were hungry, because they wanted an extra Coke, or maybe they just wanted an ice cream cone and to hang out with you, but that was a bother, they will remember. So do you wish to be immortal?
Preach.
Or immortalized in negativity, saying he wasn't worth 2 dead flies and a roach.
Right.
Pick your poison. One day we're going to step out of here. What you leave behind is your ability or the tools and resources that you put in place to ensure family traditions move along.
Yes, correct.
That our family members, you may not go to the graveyard for someone that you love dearly all your life. You may not go to the graveyard and change their flowers, but their memory is with you and it makes them immortal. You'll speak about them to the next generation. The next generation will come back and say, hey. So in respecting your time and allowing you to get back to your congregation, your students, and the programs that you were doing before, if I could have you simply differentiate in 120 seconds, if you could differentiate between the world of Ifa and that's not of Ifa, and why it's so impactful and beneficial to our soul as a people.
Okay. So it's a good question. Let's take a hack at it here, as it were. So Ifa being the wisdom of nature, when we look at this particular tradition, you mentioned earlier about telling the stories of our ancestors and remembering them and just the act of storytelling. In the Ifa tradition, we call that orisha. And we can see that as people here in the diaspora, because much of Christianity is still following that same concept. If you look at things in the Catholic Church and other churches, and we hear these saints that have been canonized, these were people who performed various acts of filial piety and charity, and maybe even performed certain miracles and left a blueprint and a footprint for the world to see, an example of what it is to live a godly life. These people were then, as they made their transition, were then raised up to be saints, and people are worshiping and praying to them in the church. In the Isheshe Ifa tradition, we call that orisha, meaning these were people who were here on the earth, the same thing, that performed these acts, and we've raised them up in remembrance. And now we call upon them because we recognize that these same ancestors, even though they may have left their physical form, are still here with us, watching over their descendants in order to help us to attain what Ifa calls the good condition. And so we have that same concept. And so Ifa is very relevant and very timely today, because so much of what we see reflected in other practices and other traditions at its core comes from the Ifa tradition. And Ifa is a system not only of conveying this information to all of humanity, but it's also a way of us being able to activate this spiritual power that resonates within us as African peoples. Yes. And this way of storytelling, what you mentioned, is a way of immortalizing ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's and we, those of us people who are in different forms of entertainment and things like that, have a beautiful opportunity to be able to continue to tell this storytelling today in that same form. Ifa is just a way of us looking at these stories in way back in the past and being able to bring the past up to the modern day today.
Nana?
A little over 2 minutes.
No, beautiful. Beautiful. Nana? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm asking you to weigh in. Come on.
What
Nana
he said.
Amoako Yiadom Gyata, people. Let's get it.
Really, really, yes. In the scheme of totality, in our African spiritual traditions, he said it in a great summation. And when we go back to zero, like you said, then things can now be added. But when you're constantly at a certain numerical equation and you're subtracting from it, you're going to fall past zero and go into the negative. And that's where it's just like temperature or Fahrenheit and Celsius. Below a certain temperature, you'll freeze to death. But where there's warmth, there's life. Where there's family, there's congeniality. Where there's congruency, there's always, it was an old saying, it's not said anymore in our cultural endeavors, said, where there's warmth, there is a heart, and where there's a heart, there's life. See, my grandmother say that. And I didn't understand it until I realized that there is a heart that pumps through ventricles and their arteries, and that blood is a certain temperature. And so we are the temple or the house, just like Jesu or Jesus or Yeshua ben Yosef or whatever name you want to refer to it by, said, know ye not that your body is the temple? You got to realize that this is the house that needs to be perpetuated. So therefore, going back to what we started in first, get your, what do we say? You got to get your act and get your act right.
That's right.
Get you some act right.
That's right.
Yeah, you got to get your act together and
That's
get you some act
Some
right.
act right.
Get some act right. And that's what we're telling everybody. Let's get some act right. You know that this, all you're doing is playing church. You playing church. You're playing this and you're playing that. You're looking through the, I call them Anglo-Saxon color glasses. Yeah. And you view the world with a neuroplasty that is African through Anglo-Saxon glasses. Because it'll be an off differential. You got to look at it right. I know I'm getting you started, Professor Dr. Jerry.
You feel me, don't you? You already feel me. You feel my spirit. I see. Go ahead.
I know you. But if you keep looking through those lenses, you're going to get a skewed outlook and a skewed view. And then your outcome will be different than what you've intended it to be, because you can't be a popsicle around roaches.
You will get covered. And not with the blood. I'm sorry. I could have it was too easy, and I'm weak today, and I had to have it. So, you know what I mean? It's like, so, I think to encapsulate Straighten Up and Fly Right was the song. I think I first heard it with Cab Calloway.
Yes.
Band.
Yeah.
And Ella picked it up and made it her own. But it's been a universal truth. We've heard it from our great-grandparents, our grandparents, and parents. There was a paradigm shift in parenting and community in, like the mid-70s, right after they started busing us, right?
Right.
There was a paradigm shift in that said, oh, these niggers is getting too smart. We have to go into the other phase of this long con. And the real sting was taking authority away from the parents. It's been slow and mental, and it has degraded our traditions being passed down because the youngers, the babies raising babies, are too worried about working 2 or 3 jobs and hustling to listen to their grandmother pass the story down about how we have survived and come this far.
Yes,
the new era of youngster has taken I know everything to a diabolical level, and they're destroying our communities. You're doing the work of the usurper for them.
That's right.
They don't have to spend any money, ammunition, gunpowder, bullets, time, thought. Because y'all got it. Anyway.
This is an extension. This is an extension of the Willie Lynch.
It is an
extension.
An extension. And they're making money. I would invite you to go check out, you know, a certain interview on the Breakfast Club where Liar Cohen just came on and said, yeah, I would love to give great music an opportunity, but I got a family to feed. I have bills to pay. Therefore, he's openly admitting in the liliest of ways, whatever I have to do to you to elevate me and mine, I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to teach you how to do it to yourself. So you think that's the way it's supposed to go.
Right, right.
And then we all go out backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Oba, is there anything you wanted to cover that I may have neglected? I know I got excited and lost train of thought from time to time. I'm not easily distracted, but my comments were benchmarks in the mission of going from A to Z. I laid down the glass and the crinkle paper in the sniper hide so that we could see them coming. And then I passed the baton to you so you could throw an alarm clock in the graveyard and wake the dead. How are we going to close this out?
I think the questions that you asked really is a good foundation, because a lot of, any type of endeavor, whether it's spiritual or otherwise, all humans have similar questions that we are asking ourselves. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my destiny? People want to know about love. They want to know about, their fate. They want to know about their career. These are common questions that all human beings are asking themselves. But these are questions that our people have specifically been asking in this country for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we live in a situation where whenever Black people start to begin to come to some working conclusions, we find ourselves in situations where our very foundation has been destabilized. And so the Ifa, Afa, Fa, Vodun, all the different traditions are really traditions that are in place to help us to have this equilibrium and to reground ourselves in our Africanness, and also in just in being awake and realizing who we are, and having the strength and courage to actively work on this, and understanding that, as had been said previously, this isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. There's a proverb, a Yoruba proverb that says, "Heaven is home and earth is the marketplace," meaning this is where we all incarnate here to the earth in order to go through our life experiences and to learn, well, what is this experience of being a Black man in this lifetime, in this particular year, as it is to be a Black woman in this particular lifetime, whatever experience that is that we may be having. There's a lesson in the vessel that we chose. And so a core foundation of any type of spiritual practice is really coming to an active practice of working on what those answers mean for us. There's always going to be a collective consciousness of how that's going to look. And then we take that knowledge back into our families and into our core and back to ourselves individually and began to do that inner work. A lot of the premise even behind how the book was written was from a perspective of talking about view and practice. So we have to have right view, because in a lot of things in the world, we have all these practices about what we're doing. Oh, I do this type of yoga, I do this type of breathing, I eat this type of food, and so on and so. But why? Why are we doing this particular thing? Who told you this is the right thing to do? Oh, but I read the magazine, this and this and this. It says this is good. This particular thing is really healthy. But is it healthy for Black people? Because some types of foods are not necessarily ideal for our physiology, for our blood type.
Medications too.
As well. And medications as well. We know, but they don't say that. They tell you everything else. Oh, this drug may cause dizziness, blindness. It may cause diarrhea, vomiting, this and that and the other. But they don't say anything about how it may this may not work the same way for Black people. We have to find that out through our own trial and our own experiences of this. And then we go see a doctor and say, oh, well, it doesn't say anything about this particular thing. I haven't found anything wrong with this particular drug, this and this and this. So we have to always be advocating for ourselves. That's a very important piece, is self-advocacy. We have to be able to see ourselves and see our own innate divine nature. Because every spiritual text teaches that all of us are created in the likeness of the Creator, which in whatever name or whatever form that people choose to believe in that. But in African culture, we are taught to honor and to venerate our mother and our father as well first. Because in African culture, your first person that you venerate is your mother and your father. For a child, that is their first God, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
First higher power.
Not just talking.
Right. You hear your mama say, oh, I brought you in this world. And what she say after that? And I can take you out.
You out of here. Yeah.
God has power for that. That's the creator. That's the power of creation. And you mentioned that earlier with Shiva, because Shiva was the creator and the destroyer.
Yes.
That's how you see the
I didn't get the yin sign. I got the yang sign.
You got the yang side.
I got the yang side. It's a problem.
But that's why it's a practice. That's why it's a practice, because with something that we're constantly working at. It's not, it's the journey. It's not something that, okay, I've done it, I've got it down, this is it. It's a constant practice. And being that, you know, the world is in a constant state of change or flux, that means that our practice is also going to adapt and change according to the times and the environment and the ecology in which we find ourselves in. Because anything which doesn't adapt and doesn't meet the changing world and environment that it finds itself in eventually dies and becomes obsolete. And so as Black people, we're constantly reinventing ourselves. And that means by default, we're also reinventing the world, and we're revisioning the world, and we're revisioning even the country it is that we live in. But that revisioning has to take place within ourselves first, because we have to reach that level of resonance and bring up that vibration inside of ourselves. Then we can take and we can share that with others as our impartation that we give to the world as well.
Sure.
Nana Amoako Yiadom Gyata. Your take. I destroy his name every time. I'm sorry, I tried.
With everything said, I would call it mystically a wrap. Because of the fact that even if we end this in the now, right at this juncture or nanosecond, we're still in the journey and the practice. In reinventing ourselves, as Obas so eloquently put it, revamping, reshaping, evolving. I like to tell people that it takes an evolution to continue the revolution. Because you have to evolve. You have to adapt. Bruce Lee said, be like water. You know, every spirituality says, be like water, flow, ebb and flow, do this, be like the drops, the dew that is upon the flower. All this, you know, soliloquy of things. And let's not be rigid. What we never want to do is become rigid, because rigidness leads to stagnation.
Exactly.
And like Obas really, really always says, but he so eloquently said just a moment ago, the Odus of, let's say, 17,000 years ago, because of agrarian back then, or hunter nomads coming through agrarian, now coming into colonization, now coming into enslavement, changed. No longer can we understand the nuances of the ancient tongue because they don't have a modernized Eiffel Tower, hip hop flavor. I remember years ago that this gentleman, and I know you've both seen it, he came up with such a great thing. It was a brother. He said the hip hop Bible. And caught my attention when I was a young person. The hip hop Bible. But what it was a change on the etymology of words. Some people would say it was pre-Ebonic. There's that term. Pre-Ebonic, but it wasn't that. It was just for the local language of the young people that were coming along. It said, Jesus with the disciples and said, "What's up?" And it got people's attention and young people, and it flooded the churches with young people because it was an adaptation of a translation, or what we call a transliteration, for the modern tongue and modern mind. And that's what we are doing. We're bringing this to the forefront again, instead of making it, as some have done, as a business. Spirituality has a business side, but it's not the business of spirituality.
That's right.
And we don't want our people any longer to get raped and regressed.
That's right.
And bombarded and extorted. We've already gone through enough hoodwinked and bamboozlement, as our ancestor Malcolm X has said. We don't need our own people perpetuating Plymouth Rock on their own people.
That's right.
That done. And now it's time for the evolution to create a revolution. And if I could leave it at that, that's what I got.
All right. Well, it's my show. I'll get the last word.
Yes, please.
I have been shown love by these two men. I love these two men as a child to a parent, as men to men, as warriors to warriors.
Okay.
I would point out that throughout the conversation, one of the central tenets that has popped in and out is that the enemy is discombobulated. Their plans in fray. They have internal fighting, divide and conquer, yes, but they're doing it to themselves. We don't have to help. Just sit back and let it evolve. The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, in the chapter that says retreat, says to fade and allow the overconfidence of your enemy to drive them into your trap.
Yes.
When they've entered the fulcrum, close the pincers and decimate them. This is not this is not, in this day and age, a call to martial action. This is a call for the engagement and ignition of critical thinking, observing the problem, knowing what the solution is, and like the Alabama bus boycott, let's get it on. Shut them out, shut them down, and take control of our own destinies. Immortality is with us. We have in our communities entire orchards of baobab trees. If you cut through the baobab trees, it's a repository of water and refreshment and food. You just have to do the work to get to it. But it's there for you. Sit still. Come back to zero. Start again. The Hype Magazine live session.
As an artist, we should reflect the time.
Why you so talented? 'Cause I'm blessed.
black.
It's really important that we build characters so that people understand their story matters.
2 Chainz and I both are just really into good food.
And when you know you are royalty, you will only aim in life to be royalty.
We're doing it right now. I don't give a damn what they say about me. Yes, I called your ass out. I know I shouldn't be saying this kind of.
Shout out to Hype Magazine Network.
Shout out to the Hype Magazine Network.